He was the most feared Mafia boss in the city, until a poor maid's baby changed everything. What he did next.
The rain hit the cobblestone streets like a drum, relentless and unforgiving, when Sofia stumbled out of the alley clutching her baby to her chest. The city smelled of wet asphalt and gasoline, but all she could feel was the tiny warmth of Luca, her son, pressed against her heart. She had been running for hours, or was it days? Time blurred when fear ruled every step. Every shadow made her flinch. Every horn that blared through the storm made her tighten her grip. The manor loomed ahead, black and menacing, yet impossibly familiar. She didn't know if she could trust anyone, but desperation had no pride. Luca whimpered softly, and the sound tore something in her chest. "Shh, it's okay, baby," she whispered, rocking him gently. Her knuckles were raw, and her hair plastered to her face. But she didn't care. Nothing mattered except keeping him safe. From behind the gates, a figure watched her. Vincent Moretti, the man known across the city as the Devil of the East Side, leaned against the wrought iron, his coat pulled tight against the rain. His black eyes studied her with the cold detachment of a man who had seen too much blood yet. Something about her, something fragile yet defiant, made his chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. He had heard rumors of her, of the poor maid who had somehow crossed his path months ago, and now here she was, soaked to the bone, clutching a baby. Sofia didn't see him at first. She only saw the walls, the imposing mansion that had been his empire, and the glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be reason enough to stop running. The gates creaked as they swung open, almost as if sensing her presence. She hesitated, her breath shaky, and Luca squirmed, pressing his face against her collarbone. Vincent stepped forward, his shoes silent on the wet stone. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice calm, but laced with an authority that made her instinctively flinch. I don't have anywhere else to go," Sofia said, her voice trembling but defiant. "Please, I just need." Her words faltered as tears mixed with rain, dripping onto Luca's tiny hands. Vincent studied her, his mind a battlefield of rules he had always lived by. Power, control, fear, these were the weapons of his world, and yet, here was this woman, trembling, exhausted, and yet unbroken. And in her arms the child. He could see it clearly, the tiny, innocent life that carried no allegiance, no debts, no sins. The baby didn't belong in his violent world, yet something deep inside him twisted painfully. He finally stepped closer, his towering presence both intimidating and protective. "Give him to me," he said, reaching out. Sofia stiffened, clutching Luca tighter. "He's mine, he's all I have." Vincent's eyes softened ever so slightly, and he lowered his voice. "I'm not gonna hurt him. I want to see him safe. Give me a chance." Sofia hesitated. Every instinct screamed to trust no one, especially not him, the man who ruled the city with blood and fear. But the storm was unrelenting, and her arms were growing weaker. Luca whimpered again, and something in her cracked. Slowly, reluctantly, she placed him into Vincent's arms. He held the baby carefully, almost reverently, and Luca's little fingers curled around Vincent's thumb. The moment was brief, yet it felt eternal. Vincent had never felt anything like this before, not in business, not in power, not in control. This tiny human had shattered his armor in a heartbeat. Sofia stepped back, her wet dress clinging to her, her hands trembling. "Please, take care of him," she whispered, her voice breaking. Vincent's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. "I will," he said, and for the first time, his voice carried something unfamiliar, an honesty he had long buried under layers of fear and ruthlessness. "But you need to leave now. It's not safe for you here." She nodded, barely able to speak, and turned to run back into the storm. Vincent watched her disappear, his grip on Luca tightening, slightly, as if he could shield the boy from the world with nothing but sheer will. The rain continued to fall, relentless and cold, but inside the manor, something warm stirred, a bond forged in silence, fear, and the tiniest heartbeat. And for the first time in a long time, Vincent Moretti felt something more powerful than fear, more binding than blood. A promise he didn't yet understand, but one he knew he couldn't break. Outside, Sofia paused at the edge of the street, shivering and unsure. Somewhere deep down, she felt a sliver of hope that he wouldn't fail her son. But she also knew that in Vincent's world, promises were fragile, and trust, Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. As she disappeared into the night, Vincent cradled Luca closer, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was a man who controlled empires, yet he now faced a challenge he couldn't bribe, intimidate, or order away. A child. And with that realization came a decision that would change everything for better or worse. Outside, thunder rolled over the city and lightning split the sky. Inside, a baby stirred, reaching for Vincent's face with tiny hands. He bent closer, letting Luca's innocent eyes meet his. And in that moment, the cold, feared Mafia boss felt something crack, a sliver of humanity returning, fragile, terrifying, and beautiful all at once. He didn't yet know how he would protect this child, or how it would unravel his carefully constructed world. But as the storm raged on, Vincent Moretti made a silent vow. No one would hurt this baby. Not her, not him, not the city. And somehow, someway, he would prove it. The night stretched on, and with every tick of the clock, the quiet tension in the manor grew. The first step had been taken, and yet neither of them knew just how far this path would lead or how much it would cost them. Sofia didn't see him smile when Luca's tiny fingers grasped his thumb, but Vincent did. And for the first time in years, he wondered if fate had a plan he could no longer ignore. The storm outside was relentless, but inside, something more powerful than fear had begun to stir. And when Luca's soft COO echoed through the dark halls, even the devil of the East Side couldn't deny that his world was about to change forever. The next morning would bring choices, confrontations, and secrets, but for tonight, he simply held the baby, letting the silence speak for all the promises he couldn't yet voice. And in that silence, everyone in the manor knew this was the beginning of something that would leave hearts broken, healed, and changed in ways no one could predict. The morning sun cut through the remnants of the storm, casting pale streaks across the marble floors of Vincent's manor. Luca slept peacefully in Vincent's arms, unaware of the city's dangers or the storm he had just survived. Vincent paced slowly, his mind a battlefield of calculations, instincts, and something far more dangerous, emotion. He had built his life on fear and control, on knowing exactly how the world bent to his will. But this tiny child, so small and unprotected, had already shattered that certainty. The weight of Luca in his arms was not just physical. It was a responsibility he had never imagined wanting. Yet, as he looked down at the baby's serene face, he realized he could no longer ignore it. The front door opened with a sharp creak, and Sofia appeared, soaked from the night's rain but determined. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, landing on Vincent. "Is he okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent didn't respond immediately. He continued pacing, Luca still cradled against his chest. Then, without warning, he stopped and looked up. "He's fine," he said finally, his voice measured, almost unnerving in its calm. "But you can't be here. Not yet." Sofia's eyes narrowed, a mixture of frustration and fear. "I have nowhere else to go," she said. "You can't just take him," and Vincent cut her off, his gaze sharp, almost imperious. "I'm not taking him. I'm protecting him. And if you come here again, you put both of you in danger." Sofia bit her lip, holding back a surge of anger and desperation. She knew he was right, and yet it hurt to hear it. Every instinct screamed to reclaim her child, to hold him, to shield him from the world herself. But she also knew Vincent's reputation. He didn't give second chances, and crossing him recklessly would be catastrophic. Vincent's eyes softened just slightly as Luca stirred in his arms and let out a tiny whimper. He adjusted his hold, rocking him gently, and Sofia caught herself staring. For all his power, all his ruthlessness, he moved with care she hadn't expected. The thought struck her. Maybe he wasn't entirely heartless. Maybe there was a part of him that could see the world differently, if only through this child. Minutes passed in tense silence. Finally, Sofia took a hesitant step closer. "Please," she said softly, "tell me what you're going to do with him." Vincent's jaw tightened. He had spent years ensuring no one could question his authority, no one could breach his walls, but now he felt that same wall crumble, brick by brick. "I don't know yet," he admitted almost too quietly, "but I swear no harm will come to him. Not while I live. Sofia's eyes searched his face, looking for a flicker of deceit, a hint of weakness. There was none. Only a man who was trying and failing to reconcile the unthinkable, caring for someone besides himself. Then I'll trust you, she said, though every word felt like a surrender. She turned to leave, but something in her chest refused to let go. Just promise me one thing. Vincent's brow arched. What? That you'll tell me if anything happens to him, she said, her voice trembling. I can't live without knowing he's safe. He considered her words, his dark eyes flickering with emotion he had long buried. I promise, he said, and in that simple, unguarded moment, the air between them shifted, fragile, tentative, but real. The days that followed were tense. Vincent's men scouted the city relentlessly, eliminating threats that lurked in the shadows. Sofia stayed hidden, watching from afar, her heart aching every time she imagined Luca in danger. And yet, she couldn't help but notice Vincent, how he moved with Luca in his arms, how his eyes softened at the smallest smile, how he whispered words only the baby could understand. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the manor, Vincent found Sofia perched on the balcony, staring out at the city with quiet longing. He approached her silently, Luca cradled against his chest. You can't keep doing this, he said gently, not looking at her. Watching from a distance won't protect him. Sofia didn't turn. And neither can you, she replied, her voice edged with sorrow. You're not built for this. Not for a child. Not for a life outside of control and power. Vincent's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. Instead, he let Luca reach up with tiny fingers and grasp his coat. The child's innocent trust was a sharp contrast to the calculated world Vincent ruled, and it cut deeper than any enemy ever could. I didn't choose this, he said finally, his voice low, but I won't fail him. Not for anyone, not even me. Sofia's eyes filled with tears, though she didn't let them fall. I know, she whispered. And in that word a fragile understanding passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that their lives were now irrevocably intertwined. But the city was unforgiving. Shadows stretched long over the streets, and whispers of betrayal and danger lingered in every corner. Vincent knew that every choice he made from this point forward would carry consequences, some small, some deadly. And yet, as he held Luca close, he realized something terrifying. He would face anything, risk everything, to keep this fragile life safe. That night, as the city slept uneasily beneath the storm clouds that lingered, Vincent stood alone in the nursery, rocking Luca gently. His mind churned with plans, strategies, and fears he had never experienced before. He had fought countless battles, negotiated impossible deals, and survived betrayals that would have destroyed lesser men. But protecting a child, that was a war he had never been trained for, and yet one he was determined to win. Somewhere in the distance, Sofia watched from the shadows, her heart torn between fear and hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this. Vincent Moretti had already changed. Luca had done something no one else could. He had cracked the armor of the most feared man in the city. And as the night stretched on, the quiet ticking of the clock was a reminder that every moment of peace was borrowed. The storm outside may have ended, but the storm of their lives was just beginning. And somewhere deep inside Vincent, a small, dangerous hope began to grow that maybe, just maybe, he could become more than a mafia boss. Maybe he could become a father. Sofia turned away silently, unwilling to let him see the flicker of hope in her eyes. She didn't yet know if it would be enough to survive the coming chaos. But for now, she allowed herself one small moment of trust, one small moment of peace. The city slept, but Vincent and Luca were wide awake, standing at the edge of a world that would demand everything from them and give nothing back. The sun had barely risen over the city when Vincent awoke to the sound of Luca's soft cries. He found the boy sitting up in his crib, small fists clenching the sheets, eyes wide and searching. Vincent knelt beside him, brushing damp strands of hair from his forehead. Easy, little one, he murmured, his voice gentler than he had expected. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like never before. For years, Vincent had ruled with fear and iron, but now his empire seemed trivial compared to keeping this tiny life safe. He carried Luca into the kitchen, where Sofia had appeared without warning. Her hair was still damp from last night's storm, her eyes sharp, assessing. "He's awake," she said simply, a trace of worry in her voice. Vincent's gaze met hers briefly. "I'm feeding him." His voice was calm, yet there was a note of defensiveness. He didn't need anyone questioning his ability, especially her. Sofia didn't respond. Instead, she watched as he prepared the bottle. His movements precise, careful. Every gesture was deliberate, yet beneath the control, there was tenderness. It was impossible for her not to notice. She cleared her throat. "He's lucky you're this careful." Vincent didn't answer, handing Luca the bottle. The baby grasped it immediately, sucking hungrily. Vincent's eyes softened involuntarily. "Luck has nothing to do with it," he said quietly. "I'm not letting anyone hurt him. No one. Not ever." Sofia's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him completely. But the world had taught her otherwise. She had seen men like Vincent destroy everything they touched, and yet he was a man feared by thousands, kneeling over her child with reverence. The morning passed in uneasy silence, punctuated by Luca's coos and gurgles. Vincent and Sofia worked in careful rhythm, sharing small tasks, exchanging minimal words, their connection growing in subtle ways. Neither acknowledged it, but the tension between them was palpable, a magnetic force drawing them closer even as fear and uncertainty hovered. By mid-afternoon, a knock on the door shattered the fragile calm. Vincent's men appeared, faces grim. "Boss, we have trouble," one said. Vincent's jaw tightened. "What kind of trouble?" The man swallowed. "A rival family, they know something. Something about you, the baby. They're moving fast." Vincent's eyes darkened, the familiar cold calculating gaze returning. Yet this time, it was tempered by fear for the child in his arms. Luca stirred, slightly, sensing the tension, and Vincent adjusted his hold protectively. "How fast?" he demanded. "Hours, maybe less." Sofia stepped closer, instinctively shielding Luca with her body. "Vincent, what do we do?" Her voice trembled, betraying the fear she had tried so hard to hide. Vincent's mind raced. His empire had taught him strategies for every conceivable threat, but never had he prepared for the vulnerability of a child. He realized, with a sharp pang in his chest, that he would go to any lengths to protect Luca, even if it meant tearing down every rule he had ever lived by. "We move him," Vincent said finally, his voice cold and commanding. "We take him somewhere safe. No one comes near him, no one sees him." "You," he said, turning to Sofia, "stay close. I won't let anyone harm him while you're with me." Sofia nodded, her heart pounding. She had no illusions about the danger, but seeing him step into action, seeing the protective fire in his eyes, gave her a strange, trembling hope. For the first time, she believed he might actually keep his promise. They moved quickly, Vincent carrying Luca through hidden corridors of the mansion, the quiet urgency of their steps echoing in the vast halls. Sofia followed, clutching a small bag of essentials. Outside, the city roared with activity, oblivious to the storm of violence brewing just beneath the surface. Vincent's men secured a convoy of black SUVs, their engines humming softly in the early morning light. He placed Luca carefully into a car seat, checking and double-checking the straps, as if a single mistake could unravel everything. Sofia watched silently, noting how every gesture was careful yet instinctive. The man who commanded fear now commanded tenderness, and it was disarming. The convoy moved through the city streets, Vincent's eyes constantly scanning every shadow. He calculated every turn, every potential threat, and yet, beneath it all, he was aware of Luca's presence, the small, rhythmic rise and fall of the baby's chest, the soft sighs of contentment. It grounded him in a way nothing else ever could. Hours passed in tense silence, the convoy weaving through safe houses and hidden routes. Finally, they arrived at a secluded villa outside the city, a place Vincent had reserved for emergencies. It was fortified, hidden from prying eyes, yet warm and welcoming inside. He carried Luca into the nursery, setting him down gently on a soft blanket. Sofia helped, smoothing the baby's hair, her eyes meeting Vincent's briefly. There was no need for words. The bond they were forming was clear, fragile, yet undeniable. Vincent watched Luca sleep, the baby's chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. He felt a pang of something unfamiliar, fear, perhaps, but also hope. He had spent his life controlling everything, bending the world to his will, but now he realized there were things he couldn't control. Love, trust, fate. Sofia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's safe for now." Vincent didn't answer immediately. He was lost in thought, the enormity of responsibility settling on him like a heavy cloak. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "I won't let anything happen to him. Not while I live. Not ever." Sofia nodded, tears threatening, but she held them back. She wanted to believe him, and somehow she did. But the danger was real, and the city outside was unforgiving. They had only won a small battle. The war for Luca's safety was just beginning. And as night fell, Vincent stood alone in the nursery, watching Luca sleep. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability, a moment of fear. He had fought countless battles, faced ruthless enemies, and survived betrayals that would have destroyed lesser men. But protecting this child, that was a war unlike any he had known. Somewhere in the shadows, Sofia watched, her heart aching with both fear and hope. The bond between them had deepened, and yet the tension of the coming storm loomed large. Vincent had made a silent vow to protect Luca at all costs, but even the most powerful man in the city could not foresee the sacrifices that would be demanded of him. Outside, the night was still, but the air was thick with anticipation. Vincent knew the hours ahead would test him, push him to limits he had never imagined, and force him to confront not just the dangers of the city, but the vulnerability he felt every time he held Luca close. And as he rocked the baby gently, whispering promises he didn't fully understand. Yet, Vincent Moretti realized that nothing, no wealth, no power, no fear could prepare him for the storm that was coming. The villa was quiet for only a short while before the tension began to thrum like a pulse through the walls. Vincent sat in the study, Luca sleeping in the nursery behind him, and the weight of impending danger pressed down harder than ever. The city never slept, and neither did threats to someone as precious and as vulnerable as his son. Vincent's phone vibrated sharply against the mahogany desk. He answered without looking at the screen. "Report," he demanded, his tone clipped, practiced. Boss Marco, his most trusted enforcer, hesitated. "They're moving. The Rossi family. They know you've got the baby. They've sent men 2 trucks, heavily armed. They're on the outskirts of the city, heading this way." Vincent's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the receiver. His mind raced, mapping every possible route, every defensive tactic, every exit. The villa was fortified, but even the strongest walls couldn't stop men willing to die to get to him. And yet, fear wasn't the first thing he felt. Rage flared hot, and sharp rage for Luca, for Sofia, for the life that had been thrust into chaos simply by existing. "I want the perimeter doubled. No one leaves, no one enters without my say." And Marco, he paused, voice low and dangerous. "Anyone who sets foot outside without orders, they die." "Yes, boss," Mark replied, urgency lacing every word. Vincent hung up and walked slowly into the nursery. Luca stirred in his sleep, tiny hands curling around the edge of his blanket. He watched the boy's chest rise and fall, the innocence in those eyes, a stark contrast to the violence just beyond the villa walls. He knelt beside him, brushing soft hair from Luca's forehead. "Not a scratch, little one," he whispered. "Not a scratch while I live." Sofia appeared silently behind him, a shadow of determination and worry. "Vincent, they're coming faster than you think," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. You can't handle this alone." Vincent turned, the weight of his expression both terrifying and heartbreaking. "I don't intend to," he said simply, "but no one touches him. Not while I breathe." The hours passed in a tense blur. Men patrolled the villa with weapons ready, eyes scanning the tree line and roads leading to the compound. Sofia stayed close, helping where she could, but every creak of the floorboard, every distant engine, sent a ripple of fear through her. She hadn't expected to be a part of this world, and yet here she was, clinging to Luca while the most feared man in the city prepared for war. As dusk fell, headlights appeared on the distant road, piercing the darkening landscape. Vincent's men signaled silently, taking their positions. He stayed in the nursery, rocking Luca gently, every instinct screaming that the coming night would demand more than he had ever given. The first truck arrived, engines low and men visible through the windows. Vincent's heart pounded, a dangerous mix of adrenaline and dread. He placed Luca gently in the crib, covering him with his arms protectively, before stepping to the window to watch. The second truck followed quickly, tires crunching over gravel. Vincent's mind raced, calculating angles, entrances, and exits. And then the first gunshots rang out, sharp and terrifying, tearing through the night like a scream. Vincent moved with lethal precision, stepping into the halls with a cold efficiency that only someone of his world possessed. His men responded in kind, gunfire echoing in the distance, shadows of violence flitting across the walls. But Vincent's focus never wavered from the nursery. Every step, every decision was to protect Luca. Minutes or hours passed in a blur of movement and adrenaline. Vincent emerged finally from the hall, blood on his sleeve, but eyes bright with relief. The attackers had been repelled, forced to retreat under his calculated strategy. The villa was safe for now. He returned to the nursery to find Luca awake, tiny fingers grasping at the air, eyes wide and innocent. Vincent's shoulders slumped, exhaustion overtaking him, and Sofia rushed to his side. "He's okay," she whispered, brushing tears from her cheeks. Vincent held Luca close, inhaling the soft scent of the baby. "He's all that matters," he murmured, voice rough with emotion. "All that matters." For the first time, Sofia allowed herself to relax, leaning against him, feeling the tension in his shoulders. And yet, neither of them could ignore the truth: they had survived the first assault. But the city's enemies would not stop. Every victory was temporary, every moment of peace borrowed. Hours later, Vincent sat alone on the balcony, Luca asleep in his arms, and the city stretched out below him, quiet but dangerous. He thought about the choices he had made, the life he had built, and the new life he was now responsible for. He realized that power, money, and fear had never mattered in the way this child mattered. Sofia appeared quietly behind him, the night air cool against her damp hair. She didn't speak, just watched him cradle Luca, the bond between them unspoken but undeniable. Vincent finally broke the silence. "I faced everything in this city," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "Enemies, betrayals, death. But nothing scared me like this. I've never feared for anyone like I fear for him." Sofia placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "That's because he's not just any life," she said softly. "He's your life now. And you can't protect him by yourself. You have to let people in." Vincent's gaze darkened, a shadow of doubt and regret crossing his face. He had spent years trusting no one, relying only on himself. And yet here, in the quiet aftermath of the first attack, he realized she was right. To protect Luca, he would have to risk opening his world, risking the vulnerabilities he had spent a lifetime hiding. The night stretched on, quiet but heavy with tension, and though they had survived the first assault, both Vincent and Sofia knew that this was only the beginning. The city, ruthless and unforgiving, would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. And in that knowledge, a silent determination formed. Vincent would fight not just with guns and strategy, but with every ounce of himself, to keep Luca safe. And as Luca stirred once more, reaching for Vincent's face with tiny hands, Vincent realized something terrifying and beautiful. He would go to the ends of the earth, face every danger, and sacrifice everything, for the sake of the child who had already captured his heart. The villa was quiet now, but the echoes of gunfire and shouting still lingered in Vincent's mind. Even though the attackers had been repelled, he couldn't shake the images of armed men charging toward the nursery, of Luca's tiny eyes widening in fear. For the first time in years, Vincent felt powerless not against his enemies, but against the fragility of life itself. He sat alone in the study, the night outside heavy and suffocating. Luca slept in the next room, Sofia nearby, yet he felt the weight of isolation pressing down. All the plans, the deals, the ruthless strategies that had kept him alive in the Mafia world seemed meaningless now. This child had shifted the center of his universe, and the vulnerability it brought was unbearable. Vincent's mind drifted back to the first time he had seen Sofia. She had been a simple maid, barely able to afford her own safety, yet in her something stubborn, fierce, and quietly determined had stayed with him. He remembered the cold dismissal he had given her months ago, the way he had let fear and pride dictate his actions. And now, here she was again, intertwined in his life by fate, guarding the one thing he had never expected to care about. Sofia entered the study quietly, her eyes searching his. "Vincent," she began softly, "I know you're thinking about what happened, about them." He didn't look up, his jaw tight. "I can't stop thinking about it," he admitted. "Every angle, every possibility, every way they could get him. I failed before, Sofia. I failed people I should have protected." She approached and rested a hand on his arm. "Vincent, you're not failing now. You're here, and you're fighting for him. That's all that matters." He closed his eyes, letting her touch ground him, even briefly. "I've lost too much," he whispered. "People I trusted, people I cared about. And now I have him, and I can't screw this up. Not Luca, not you, not anyone else I let in." Sofia's expression softened. She had seen that side of him before, a rare, human vulnerability, but now it was laid bare. "Then don't think about the past. Focus on now. Focus on him." Vincent opened his eyes, dark and stormy but also glimmering with determination. "I've spent my life building walls," he said, his voice low. "Walls to keep people out, walls to keep me safe, but—" He trailed off, looking toward the nursery where Luca slept. "Maybe some walls need to come down." Sofia didn't speak immediately. She simply let him sit with the truth of his own words, letting the tension fade into something fragile, something new. And then she nodded. "Maybe they do," she said softly. "And it doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." The hours passed with quiet conversation, punctuated by the soft cues from Luca's room. Vincent told her things he had never admitted to anyone, not Marco, not his lieutenants, not even himself. He spoke of regrets, of betrayals, of the choices that had hardened his heart over decades. And yet, in that sharing, something shifted. The cold, untouchable Mafia boss began to uncoil, revealing a man capable of love, capable of fear, and capable of redemption. By the time dawn approached, the city was bathed in a muted gold light, and Vincent was exhausted but alert. He had made decisions, laid plans, and yet, he realized that the greatest challenge was not the rival family or gunfire, it was navigating this fragile human connection that had already begun to reshape him. Sofia touched his hand lightly, sensing the storm within him. "Vincent, you're not alone in this," she said. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. You, me, and Luca." Vincent looked down at his son, asleep and innocent, and then back at Sofia. In that moment, he understood something profound. Protecting Luca wasn't just about walls or weapons or strategy. It was about trust, about letting others in, about facing fear head-on, even when it threatened to consume him. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside the villa. The alarm system triggered. Vincent's eyes sharpened instantly. "Get Luca," he ordered, moving toward the nursery with practiced speed. Sofia followed without hesitation. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Vincent saw shadows moving among the trees. The Rossi men hadn't been fully repelled. They had underestimated him, and they were back. Rage flared, cold and controlled. But beneath it, an unfamiliar panic throbbed. Luca's safety was now on the line, and Vincent felt the weight of every past failure crushing him. He moved swiftly, lifting Luca into his arms and shielding him with his body. Sofia followed closely, heart pounding, every step measured. Vincent's men took positions outside, weapons ready, while Vincent himself stayed at the forefront of danger, eyes scanning every shadow. The attackers advanced, but Vincent's strategic mind worked faster. He set traps, used the villa's architecture to his advantage, and commanded his men with precision. Every shot fired, every move made, was calculated to keep Luca safe. And yet, Every time Lucas stirred in his arms, Vincent felt a primal, protective instinct that no strategy or power could fully contain. Finally, the attackers were forced to retreat, battered and disoriented. Vincent's chest heaved with exhaustion and relief. Luca, still asleep, stirred but did not cry. Sofia exhaled slowly, brushing damp hair from her forehead, eyes locking with Vincent's. "You did it," she whispered. "You kept him safe." Vincent's voice was low, almost a growl of emotion he couldn't name. "We did it. Together." The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. For the first time, Vincent allowed himself to simply hold Luca without thinking, without calculating, without fearing the next attack. He realized that the battles he had fought all his life, the enemies he had vanquished, were nothing compared to the constant, invisible war for this child's safety. As dawn broke fully over the villa, Vincent stepped outside with Luca in his arms. The city was waking, oblivious to the violence that had played out under its nose. But Vincent didn't care. All that mattered was his son, alive and safe. And Sofia, standing close enough that her presence anchored him, reminded him that he was capable of more than vengeance or fear. But beneath the relief, a seed of unease remained. The Rossi family had retreated for now, but Vincent knew their return was inevitable. The stakes were higher than ever, and he could feel the tension in every fiber of his being. Luca's life had changed everything, and Vincent was beginning to understand that protecting him would demand not just strategy and power but heart, sacrifice, and perhaps love he had never allowed himself to feel before. And as the sun rose fully, casting long shadows over the city, Vincent stood silently, Luca cradled against his chest, Sofia beside him, and the weight of a new, terrifying, and beautiful responsibility pressing against his soul. The villa was cloaked in a fragile calm, but Vincent knew it was only temporary. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, reminded him that danger never slept. Luca's soft breathing in the nursery was the only thing keeping him grounded, yet it also made the world outside feel sharper, more dangerous. He could no longer see life as just black and white. Every choice now had consequences, not only for him but for the boy in his arms. Sofia appeared quietly at the doorway, a bundle of concern and determination in her eyes. "Vincent," she began, hesitating, as she saw the tension etched into his features. "We can't keep hiding forever. They'll find him eventually. And there's more you're not telling me." Vincent's jaw tightened. He had always prided himself on controlling the flow of information, on keeping secrets tightly sealed. But now, with Luca's life at stake, he realized that secrecy could be dangerous. He turned to her slowly, meeting her gaze. "There are things from my past that could come back to hurt him," he admitted. "People I thought were gone, enemies I buried, they remember. And they will come." Sofia stepped closer, placing a tentative hand on his arm. "Then let me help you. Let me stand with you, not just for Luca, but for you too. You don't have to carry this alone." Vincent's dark eyes softened slightly, yet a shadow lingered. He had built walls his entire life to protect himself, and letting anyone, and especially someone as vulnerable and honest as Sofia, felt terrifying. Yet, beneath the fear, a spark of trust began to form. "I've never let anyone in like this," he admitted. "And I don't know if I can start now." Sofia smiled faintly, though her worry didn't vanish. "Then start with me," she said simply. "For Luca. For all of us." He swallowed hard, and for a moment, the facade of the unshakable Mafia boss slipped. "All right," he said finally. "You stay, but you follow my rules. One wrong move, and..." Sofia interrupted, firm but gentle. "No threats. I'm here, Vincent. I trust you." That night, the villa was on high alert. Vincent and his men patrolled tirelessly, every shadow watched, every noise analyzed. But as Luca slept, Vincent found himself in the nursery again, holding the boy against his chest. There was a tenderness in him that he had never allowed himself to feel before, a vulnerability that terrified him more than any gun or rival ever could. Then came the first warning, a subtle one, but unmistakable. A note slipped under the door, soaked with rain and bearing the unmistakable mark of the Rossi family. Vincent picked it up with gloved hands, reading the words slowly. "You can hide, you can run, but he belongs to us." A cold fury rose in him. one he hadn't felt in years. He cradled Luca closer, letting the baby rest against his chest, and whispered, "Not today. Not ever." Sofia appeared beside him, reading the note over his shoulder. Her face paled, but she didn't flinch. "They're serious, Vincent," she said. "We need a plan. This is bigger than we thought." Vincent's mind worked rapidly, calculating possibilities, escape routes, contingencies. He realized that to protect Luca, he would have to confront not only his enemies but his own past, allies he had abandoned, betrayals he had orchestrated. They were all dangerous threads that could unravel his fragile peace. By dawn, Vincent had made a decision. Luca would be moved to a secure, hidden location, one only a handful of trusted men knew. He would stay with him, and Sofia would accompany them. But even as he outlined the plan, his chest ached with the weight of what this meant. Danger lurked not just outside the walls, but within every choice he made. The preparations were tense, meticulous. Vincent's men secured vehicles, weapons, and safe houses. Sofia moved with quiet efficiency, carrying supplies for Luca and keeping a watchful eye on him. Vincent, meanwhile, studied every angle, every potential threat, but his mind kept returning to something he had never expected. The way Luca's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, the way his innocent eyes seemed to trust him unconditionally. As they prepared to leave, Vincent took a moment to kneel beside Luca's crib. He brushed soft strands of hair from the boy's face, whispering promises he didn't fully understand yet. "I won't let anyone hurt you, Luca," he said quietly. "Not while I live. I swear it." Sofia watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and admiration. "He's lucky to have you," she murmured. Vincent looked up at her, a shadow of uncertainty crossing his face. "I'm not sure I deserve him," he admitted, "but I'll die trying to keep him safe." They left the villa just as dawn broke, shadows stretching across the road. The convoy moved silently, alert, every man on edge. Vincent drove himself, Luca asleep in the back seat, Sofia beside him. The city passed by unnoticed, but Vincent's mind was a storm of strategy, fear, and determination. Hours into the drive, Vincent caught sight of headlights in the rearview mirror fast, unmarked. He tensed, instinct kicking in. "They're following us," he said calmly, though every muscle in his body screamed. Sofia's hand found his, gripping it tightly. "What do we do?" Vincent's jaw tightened. "We lose them. We don't engage. Our priority is him. Nothing else matters." The convoy adjusted, taking winding roads and hidden routes, Vincent calculating every turn with precision. The city streets blurred past, but in the back of his mind, he knew this was only the beginning. The Rossi family had escalated, and every move they made would put Luca at risk. And as the sun climbed higher, Vincent realized something he hadn't admitted to himself before. Protecting this child wasn't just about survival, it was about redemption. For years he had been feared, hated, and alone. Now, Luca gave him a purpose he had never known. A reason to fight, not for power, not for vengeance, but for love. For the first time in decades, Vincent Moretti felt vulnerable and alive. The convoy moved like ghosts through the winding back roads, the city fading behind them, but Vincent's senses remained razor-sharp. Every turn, every shadow, every flicker of movement in the rearview mirror was a potential threat. Luca slept in the back seat, unaware of the danger, and Vincent's heart ached with the thought that this innocence might be shattered if even a single misstep occurred. Sofia sat beside him, clutching a bag of essentials, her eyes flicking constantly to the rear-view mirror and then to the road ahead. "Vincent, we can't keep running like this forever," she said quietly, her voice calm but edged with urgency. "They'll never stop chasing him. Not until they get him, or until we make them pay." Vincent's jaw tightened. He had spent years ruling with fear, orchestrating death and destruction with surgical precision, and yet, facing the reality of protecting Luca, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades: uncertainty. "I know," he admitted, voice low, dark. "But the moment I make a mistake, even a fraction of a second, they take him. I can't let that happen." They drove in silence for miles, the tension building like the storm clouds that had once hung over the city. Then, just as Vincent began to relax slightly, a truck roared past them, cutting off their path. Armed men poured out, blocking the road ahead. The Rossi family had anticipated their escape route. Vincent's eyes narrowed. He shifted gears, taking control with an intensity born of desperation. "Hold him tightly," he said to Sofia as he swerved into a narrow dirt path. The tires skidded, mud flying, but he kept the vehicle steady, calculating every move with lethal precision. Sofia's hands clutched Luca protectively, her body pressed against him instinctively. "Vincent, be careful," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her outward calm. Vincent's eyes flicked to her for a fraction of a second. "I've never been more careful in my life," he said, and his tone held a deadly promise. The chase intensified. Gunfire echoed behind them, striking the metal of the convoy's vehicles. Vincent's men returned fire, but Vincent's attention never wavered from Luca in the back seat. Every movement, every turn, was dictated by one thought: keep him alive. Hours passed like this, adrenaline and fear blending into a rhythm that made the world outside blur. And then came the quietest threat, the kind that left no marks but could destroy everything. A name whispered in the wind, a name Vincent had hoped would never resurface. "Marco," Vincent muttered under his breath. He knew the man leading the Rossi men wasn't just another rival. He had once been a trusted ally, someone Vincent had betrayed years ago in the ruthless power struggles that had shaped his empire. And now, that betrayal had come back, sharpened and deadly. Sofia caught the shadow that passed over his face. "What is it?" she asked gently, but Vincent shook his head. "Nothing you need to worry about yet. Just keep Luca safe. That's all that matters right now." The convoy finally reached a secluded safe house, a fortress hidden among dense woods. Vincent immediately ushered Luca inside, checking every corner, every lock, every escape route. Sofia followed closely, carrying the sleeping boy and keeping a watchful eye on the perimeter. Once inside, Vincent allowed himself a moment he hadn't permitted in years: vulnerability. He sank into a chair, Luca still cradled in his arms, feeling the weight of responsibility more intensely than ever before. Sofia sat beside him, brushing damp strands of hair from his forehead. "Vincent," she said softly, "we can't keep hiding forever. Sooner or later you're going to have to face him, Marco, I mean. You can't run from the past." Vincent's dark eyes softened, reflecting both fear and regret. "I know," he admitted, "but it's not just about me anymore. It's about him, Luca. I can't let anyone hurt him, even if it means facing everything I've buried, everything I've tried to leave behind." Sofia reached for his hand. "Then face it with me. Don't do this alone." Vincent's jaw tightened, and for the first time, he allowed himself to admit something he had never thought he would. He needed her not just for support, but because facing the storm alone would break him. And in that quiet admission, a new bond formed, stronger and more fragile than fear, more binding than blood. The night stretched long and silent. Outside, the forest was dark, hiding secrets and enemies alike. Inside, Vincent held Luca close, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep but intended to. Sofia watched him, silently marveling at the transformation, the fear. Mafia boss, now a man shaped and softened by love and responsibility. But even in the quiet, Vincent knew the storm wasn't over. Marco's shadow loomed. The Rossi family would not relent, and the fragile peace they had found could shatter in a heartbeat. And as Luca stirred, reaching up for Vincent's face with tiny, trusting hands, Vincent realized something terrifying and beautiful. He would go to the ends of the earth, face every danger, and confront every ghost of his past, just to keep this child alive. The journey ahead would test every skill, every instinct, and every shred of humanity he had left. And Vincent Moretti, the man who had ruled with fear and ruthlessness, understood that protecting Luca would demand more than power. It would demand his heart. The forest was silent except for the distant hum of the city, a faint reminder that the world outside never paused, even for those hiding in shadows. Vincent sat in the safe house's dim light, Luca cradled against his chest, Sofia perched close by, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The weight of what had just happened, the ambush, the relentless pursuit, Marco's return, pressed on him like a storm he could not outrun. He stared at Luca, tiny eyes closed in sleep, and felt something he had never allowed himself to feel: fear. Not for himself, not for power or loyalty, but for this fragile life that depended entirely on him. He had built empires, survived betrayals, and ruled with an iron fist, but protecting a child, protecting Luca, was a battle unlike any he had fought. Sofia's voice cut through the tense silence. "Vincent, we can't keep hiding forever. Marco knows we're here. The Rossi family won't give up. You need to act." Vincent's jaw tightened. "I've built my life on control, on strategy," he murmured, almost to himself. "And now I have to choose between everything I've fought for and him." He brushed Luca's soft hair from his forehead. "I've never been afraid to die. But I can't let him die. Not like this. Not ever." Sofia leaned closer, her gaze steady, unwavering. "Then we fight smart. We don't react out of anger. We plan. We survive. Together." Vincent looked at her, the storm of rage, fear, and regret raging behind his dark eyes. He knew she was right. He had spent years ruling through fear, but now fear had a new face: the innocence of Luca. And the reckoning with Marco would not just be physical. It would force him to confront the man he used to be, the mistakes he had made, and the consequences that had followed him like a shadow. Hours later, Vincent mapped out his strategy. He would lure Marco into a trap, one where the Rossi family would believe they held the upper hand, only to find themselves ensnared in a plan calculated with lethal precision. Sofia listened, absorbing every detail, her hand never leaving his shoulder. "And Luca?" she asked quietly. Vincent's gaze softened as he looked toward the sleeping boy. "He stays with us," he said firmly. "No one touches him. Not tonight. Not ever." The night fell like a velvet curtain, and Vincent's convoy moved silently through hidden forest paths. Every movement was deliberate, every turn calculated to mislead their pursuers. The trap was set. Marco would believe they were vulnerable, but Vincent had anticipated every move, every possibility. When the moment came, chaos erupted. Marco and his men charged into the ambush, but Vincent's forces were ready. Gunfire cracked, shouts echoed through the trees, and for the first time, Vincent allowed himself to step fully into the fight, not just for power, not just for revenge, but to protect the life in his arms. Through the smoke and noise, Vincent moved with lethal precision, each step dictated by both instinct and desperation. Sofia remained close, helping where she could, ensuring Luca remained shielded. Vincent's heart pounded, not from the violence, but from the knowledge that any misstep could destroy everything he had sworn to protect. Finally, the battle reached its peak. Marco stood before him, eyes blazing with anger and betrayal. "You left me." Marco spat, voice dripping with venom. "You ruined everything for me, and now you take the boy." Vincent's voice was low, controlled, but deadly. "I protect what matters," he said, stepping closer. "You're a ghost of my past. This is my future." The confrontation was tense, almost silent beneath the chaos surrounding them. And then Vincent acted, swift and precise, disarming Marco and neutralizing the threat without unnecessary violence. Every move was calculated to end the fight, preserve lives, and ensure Luca's safety. As the last of Marco's men fled, Vincent exhaled deeply, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Luca stirred in his arms, eyes blinking awake, tiny fingers reaching for Vincent's face. He smiled faintly, a weary, unguarded smile, and kissed the top of Luca's head. Sofia approached, tears in her eyes but relief in her voice. "He's safe," she whispered. Vincent looked at her, the weight of the night pressing down, and allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability. "He's alive," he said quietly, "and that's all that matters." For the first time in decades, Vincent felt the fragility of life in full force. The city outside remained ruthless and unforgiving, but inside the forested safe house, he had carved a small sanctuary for Luca, a place where love and protection mattered more than power, fear, or revenge. Yet, even in victory, he knew the challenges were far from over. The Rossi family would return, old enemies would rise, and the choice he made now would shape not only Luca's future but his own redemption. But for this moment, this rare, fleeting moment, Vincent held his son close, Sofia beside him, and allowed himself to feel something he hadn't in years, hope. The dawn broke slowly over the forest, pale light spilling across the safe house. Vincent sat on the porch, Luca asleep in his arms, Sofia nearby, a blanket draped over her shoulders. The night's violence still lingered in the air, the smoke of gunfire, the echo of shouting, the sharp taste of fear and adrenaline. But for the first time since Luca had entered his life, Vincent allowed himself to simply breathe. He traced tiny fingers curling around his own, marveling at how something so small could anchor a man so thoroughly. For years, Vincent had ruled through fear and power, and yet this child, innocent, unknowing, utterly dependent, had rendered all that strength fragile, human, real. Sofia's voice broke through his thoughts. "Vincent," she said softly, "you didn't just fight for Luca. You changed. I saw it last night, how you held him, how you moved. You're different now. You care in ways no one's ever made you before." Vincent's dark eyes met hers, flickering with emotions he rarely allowed himself to show. Regret, hope, fear, and love all battled behind them. "I've spent my life hiding," he admitted quietly, "hiding from pain, from people, from myself. But I can't hide from him. Not from Luca, not anymore." Sofia reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "And you don't have to. None of us do. We have each other now." The weight of her words pressed against him, a mix of comfort and fear. He had never been one to trust easily. His life had been a series of calculated moves, betrayals, and survival. Letting someone in, even Sofia, even this child, felt both terrifying and inevitable. He realized that Luca's presence had shattered not just his rules but the walls around his heart. Hours later, Vincent walked through the forest, surrounding the safe house, carrying Luca, Sofia beside him. The world outside was quiet, but he knew that peace was temporary. The Rossi family would recover, threats would continue to lurk, and his past would never fully release him. But as he looked down at Luca's sleeping face, he understood something he hadn't allowed himself to before. He was willing to face everything, to risk everything for this child. Sofia glanced at him, a small, unspoken question in her eyes. Vincent met her gaze, dark and intense, and nodded slightly. "We protect him," he said simply. "Together." And then came the unexpected, a whisper of the past Vincent had tried to bury. A knock at the safe house door, hesitant, cautious. Vincent tensed instantly, instincts honed over decades kicking in. He placed Luca safely in the crib and motioned for Sofia to stay close. When he opened the door, he was confronted by a man he had once trusted, implicitly a man he had betrayed in his ruthless climb to power. Marco had returned, eyes wary, hands raised slightly. "I didn't come to fight," he said carefully. "I came to warn you." Vincent's heart raced. He didn't trust easily, and this sudden shift in Marco's stance was a dangerous uncertainty. "Warn me? About what?" he asked, voice low, measured. Marco stepped closer, glancing briefly toward the crib. "The Rossi family, they're not done. They've realized the boy is not just a pawn. They see him as leverage. You've made enemies who will stop at nothing. They're bringing more men, bigger guns, and they won't care who gets hurt. Luca is the target." Vincent's chest tightened, rage and fear mingling in a dangerous storm. He had faced countless enemies, yet the thought of anyone threatening Luca ignited a fury he hadn't known existed. "Then we end this," he growled. "Tonight. I won't wait for them to come after him." Sofia placed a hand on his arm, her eyes steady. "Vincent, we need a plan. Not just anger. Not just fighting. You can't face them alone." He looked down at Luca again, his tiny fingers clutching at the blanket. "I won't risk him," he whispered. "But I'll face them. Every last one, if it comes to it." The next hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Vincent's men fortified the safe house, mapping exits, traps, and strategies. Sofia remained close, helping where she could, a presence both grounded and a reminder of the family they were forming together. And all the while, Luca slept peacefully, the fragile center of a storm that threatened to consume them all. As night fell, Vincent stood on the porch, cradling Luca in his arms. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the distant sound of movement, soldiers, enemies, whispers of betrayal, shadows of violence. He knew the coming night would demand every skill, every instinct, every ounce of ruthlessness and courage he possessed. But for the first time, he felt something more: hope. Not naive or fragile hope, but the hard, determined hope of a man who had been given a chance at redemption, a second life, and the chance to protect something pure and innocent in a world built on corruption and fear. Sofia stepped beside him, her hand finding his, a silent pledge that they faced the coming storm together. Vincent looked down at Luca, asleep against his chest, and whispered, a promise only he could make: I will never let them take you, not while I breathe, not ever. The night stretched before them, filled with danger, uncertainty, and the unyielding weight of the city's darkness. But Vincent had learned something crucial: love, responsibility, and family could transform even the most hardened heart. And he would fight with every ounce of himself to ensure that Luca survived and thrived in a world that had never been kind to innocence. The forest was silent, thick with tension, the kind of silence that screamed louder than any gunshot. Vincent stood on the porch of the safe house, Luca cradled carefully in his arms, Sofia beside him, her hand steady on his shoulder. Outside, the darkness shifted, revealing movement, shadowy figures approaching through the trees, the Rossi family's reinforcements moving with lethal precision. Vincent's heart beat in measured rhythm, every sense razor sharp. He had faced countless enemies in his life, but this was different. This was personal. This was about the child who had changed everything, the woman who had awakened a part of him he thought long dead, and the life he was finally willing to risk everything to protect. He turned to Sofia, dark eyes glinting with a fierce resolve. Stay with him, he said, nodding toward Luca. No matter what happens, you keep him safe. Sofia's grip tightened on his arm. We face it together, she said firmly, unwilling to leave his side. Vincent allowed himself a brief, fleeting smile. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold, deadly focus of a man who had built his life on fear and control. He stepped forward, moving toward the first wave of attackers. His men flanked him, their guns ready, but Vincent knew that his focus had to remain singular: protect Luca, neutralize the threat, and survive. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the trees. Vincent moved like a shadow, precise, controlled, lethal. Every step, every shot, every movement was a calculated dance between death and survival. He thought of Luca in the safe room, of the tiny life depending entirely on his success, and fury fueled his every action. Hours passed in a blur of smoke, screams, and strategy. The attackers were relentless, but Vincent had anticipated their every move, using both the terrain and his own mind like weapons. Slowly, methodically, the Rossi family's assault began to crumble. Men fled, disoriented and beaten, while Vincent and his forces maintained unyielding dominance. Finally, Marco emerged from the shadows, gun in hand, eyes blazing with anger and betrayal. Vincent froze for a fraction of a second, not out of fear, but calculation. This was the man who had haunted his past, the reminder of mistakes he had buried. And now he had to face him fully. You left me to rot, Marco spat, advancing, and now you protect him. Vincent's dark eyes narrowed. I protect what matters, he said coldly, and you are no longer part of my world. Leave or die. The confrontation was brutal but brief. Vincent disarmed Marco with precision, holding him at gunpoint, and finally Marco's threats dissolved into resignation. The Rossi family's remaining forces had scattered. The ambush ended decisively. For the first time in decades, Vincent allowed himself a moment to breathe. The storm had passed for now. He returned to the safe house and cradled Luca, who had stirred at the distant sounds of battle. The baby's innocent eyes blinked up at him, and Vincent felt something he had never known before: the overwhelming, unshakable weight of love. Sofia stepped closer, her face streaked with sweat and grime, but her eyes shining with relief. He's safe, she whispered. Vincent nodded, tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed threatening the edges of his control. He's alive, he murmured, and I will keep him that way, no matter what. The city beyond the forest was ruthless, unforgiving, and filled with shadows that would never fully disappear. But within the walls of the safe house, a fragile sanctuary had been carved a space, defined not by power, wealth, or fear, but by love, trust, and determination. Vincent looked down at Luca, tiny fingers grasping his own, and Sofia beside him. and realized that life had given him a gift he had never expected: redemption, hope, and the chance to be more than a mafia boss. He could be a father, a protector, a man capable of love and sacrifice. And as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, Vincent made a silent promise, not just to Luca, but to himself. He would fight every day, face every danger, and endure every trial to protect this fragile, perfect life. He would allow himself to feel, to hope, and to love fully and without reservation. The world could be cruel, and the city could be merciless, but inside that small safe house, life had won. Luca's soft coos filled the room. Sofia's hand rested lightly on Vincent's arm, and for the first time, Vincent knew the meaning of true power, not fear, but love. And in that quiet, sacred moment, the past was forgiven, the present was cherished, and the future, though uncertain, was theirs. If you've been moved by Vincent, Sofia, and Luca's story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more cinematic mafia love stories that touch the heart and stay with you long after the screen goes dark.